Hi, Deacon Ed McCormick here at St. John the Baptist, and I've just come from our Saturday morning men's group, and I wanted to share with you the incredible discussion we had today. And the theme I want to talk to you about is the revolution that Jesus brings about. We often don't think about Jesus bringing about, producing a revolution, but in fact I think he does. One that is revolutionary for world culture, for society, for the way we treat each other. Let me explain. Every Sunday for the past couple of weeks, we've been reading Mark's Gospel. And we started reading chapter 8, verses 31 to 35, where Peter names Jesus as the Christ. And from there, Jesus is teaching the disciples as he's leading them to Jerusalem. And if you pay attention to what Jesus is teaching the disciples, and the disciples struggle to understand what he's saying, you will get a glimpse into the kind of revolution that Jesus is bringing about. Let me explain. So, in the first instance, Peter responds to Jesus' question, "Who do people say that I am?" by announcing, "You are the Christ." Now, the Christ means the King. Peter thinks Jesus is the long-awaited Davidic king, the anointed Messiah, who is going to defeat Israel's enemies, restore Israel's nation to glory, and it will be a position of great power, where he will eventually rule the world. And Peter thinks this is about to happen. Here's the first revolution that Jesus introduces. He tells Peter that he has to suffer, that Jesus himself will suffer and will be crucified. So think about it. Here's Peter, who thinks the king is finally here, and Jesus turns the whole thing around, turns upside down his view of what king and kingdom is, by associating it with suffering and crucifixion. Here's the second revolution. As they're walking from Galilee towards Jerusalem, Jesus' disciples are debating who's the greatest, who's the most important, because they still think that this is going to be a Davidic style monarchy. And Jesus asked them when they get to Peter's house, "What were you guys talking about?" And he knows they were talking about who's the greatest. And Jesus pulls aside one of Peter's kids, maybe his little daughter, puts his arms around her and says, "Whoever welcomes someone like this welcomes me. Whoever welcomes the least welcomes me." Now, children in the first century had no standing or status. They were invisible and disposable. And so what Jesus is doing is saying, you guys are focused on who's the greatest. You're focused on who's the most powerful and wealthy and attractive. And I want you to focus your priorities on the least, on the most vulnerable. Again, a total revolution in their assumptions about what they should prioritize. Here's the third moment in this revolution. Jesus' disciples, James and John, approach him as they're on this journey towards Jerusalem. And they tell him, they don't ask him, they tell him that they want to sit at his right and left. They want to be his chief of staff and his kind of second in command. And Jesus says, you guys have no idea what you are asking for. You see, in their minds, they want to be people of power, people of respect and honor. They want to have these positions where they will be served by others. And here Jesus comes and says, the Gentiles, the Caesars and the governors, the Pilates of the world, the Herods of the world, they lord their power over other people. But in the kingdom that's coming, the greatest will be the person who serves. And so again, a revolution in their perspective. They think that the greatest is the one who is served. And Jesus says, no, the greatest is the one who serves. Now notice how Jesus himself embodies this revolution. He is the one who serves everyone else. He always prioritizes the least and the lost and the vulnerable, the afraid, the sick and the dying. He is heading towards his death, progressively becoming powerless so that God's power can shine. Now, the greatest revolution of all that Jesus introduces into the world is the cross, because the crucifixion of Jesus is the brutal torture and suffering and death that he endured at the hands of the Romans. And it's after the death of Jesus, with the resurrection and the gift of the Spirit, that the church has a revolution in its view of this event. Instead of seeing this as this event of shame and horror and brutality and absolute loss and devastation, suddenly we are invited to see the cross as the victory of God, the defeat of evil, the beginning of our freedom. The cross now introduces into culture the focus on those who suffer, those who are dying, on the victims, rather than the expulsion of them. So Jesus introduces and embodies a tremendous revolution that is still ahead of the church and ahead of all of us, and that the Spirit is giving us the power and the vision to begin to adopt and live.